Hi everyone, I'm Theresa. I know I haven't sent anything out for a while. There's kind of been a lot going on in my life, as I'm sure that's the same with most people these days. But lately I have been sitting with this idea of anxiety, and this is something that I've lived with since I was a little girl. And it initially came in the form of pretty severe obsessive compulsive disorder. I would say probably around the age of 8 is when I started to feel those intrusive thoughts and then the need to compulsively do something to make them go away. And this is something that my mom has struggled with. It definitely runs in the family, so I know that there's that genetic component to it. But this idea of anxiety, this theme of anxiety, has been something ever present in my life since I was very small. And more recently, I I started seeing a therapist through the VA, which is the Veterans Administration. I've seen a lot of therapists throughout my life, but this one in particular, we've been working with the idea of, social phobia and the fear of speaking in front of people. And that's been something that, again, has kind of plagued me at different times throughout my life. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's that big of an issue, and then other times it can be severely debilitating. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about my own experience with it and then how to use the tools of mindfulness, meditation, self compassion to work with this challenge because it can be very debilitating, it can be exhausting, and it definitely puts a damper on life. And I would imagine that, at some point in your life, you have dealt with anxiety, and it's just kind of a matter of, is it a daily issue? Is it extremely interfering with your life? So there's a continuum of how anxiety presents itself in people's lives. For me, as I said, as a little girl, it started as obsessive compulsive disorder. I also had a lot of fear as a gymnast, and so I think the anxiety kind of manifested in that way as well. I had a lot of what are called mental blocks, where you would maybe lose your back handspring and or lose, we'd call it losing skills. So, you had the skill and you could do it, and then all of a sudden one day you're just too afraid to even try. And I started working with this in my own mind. I didn't even know what I was doing at the time, but I think I was 8 or 9 and I had lost my series on beam, which, for those of you who aren't in the gymnastics world, is a series is when you're connecting a couple of skills together. So I would do a back handspring and then another back handspring. And I was really scared to do it, and I had lost it. And so what I started doing was I imagined in my mind that I was playing it on a VCR. That's what we had back then, were the VCR tapes. So I would play it in my head, back handspring, and then I would imagine that on the VCR I would rewind it and then push play. And so in my mind, I'd play it on the VCR, rewind, and then I'd step up and push play and go. So this was something that I just kind of developed in my mind as a little girl. And so I started to see the power of my mind in working with these issues. Now, fast forward several years, that was just a common theme. When I was 10 years old, I was working with a coach who was pretty pushy, and he ended up, you know, making me do things that I wasn't really ready to do. And I was trying to go elite, and it was too soon. Everything was moving too soon, too fast. And so, you know, I basically ended up losing most of my skills. I would run down the vault runway and just balk, what we would call it when you just stop and can't do it. I would cast a handstand on bars and swing down and not do anything because I just had all of these mental blocks. I was so afraid of things because it was moving too fast for what I was ready for mentally and physically. So, another bout with anxiety and fear. Now, outside of the gym, I was also experiencing a lot of anxiety and OCD, and it was more in the form of I was so afraid that I was going to lose my focus. At that point I wanted to go to the Olympics, and I didn't want to just go to the Olympics. I wanted to win the Olympics, and I was so afraid that if I got too, involved with friends, or if I was having too much fun outside of the gym, that I wouldn't want to continue with gymnastics. And so I went to this extreme of just of not wanting to hang out with friends outside of the gym, not wanting to do anything outside of the gym. I started homeschooling because I was like compulsively afraid of losing my dream. And, so, some people think, oh, this perfectionist, this kind of OCD tendency in athletics is good. It helps you get better. It makes you reach that level of perfection. And maybe there was some benefit to it, but it was also deeply disturbing and very stressful, and it interfered with the joy in my life. So, um, continue to fast forward through the years. I almost made it to the Olympics. I was the alternate for the Olympic team. And then after the Olympic Games, I fell into depression. The anxiety piece wasn't as strong, but then going into college gymnastics, the anxiety started to manifest as disordered eating, and then the anxiety around performance started after I won NCAA's. So my freshman year, for whatever reason, I felt very confident. I wasn't as anxious with competition. And, after I won, I think there was this expectation that I had put on myself. And so I started clamping down tighter and tighter with anxiety and disordered eating. I've got to look a certain way, I have to be a certain way. And really, nobody else was putting that expectation on me. It was just kind of an internal issue. And so, the anxiety was manifesting in different ways. I continued to pull on my resources and my tools. I worked with a sports psychologist, I worked with a nutritionist. I continued to use my mind to the best of my ability to relax before I competed. And I kept going. I ended up getting the most tens of anybody at the University of Utah, despite feeling an immense amount of anxiety and fear around competition. And so then, after my gymnastics career, I went to PA school and was just really noticing that the anxiety was so strong. Anytime I would raise my hand in class, my heart would pound out of my chest. I was so afraid that I was going to forget what I was saying. There was just this paranoia of performance, and I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to mess up. And so I just kind of kept myself, and it continued to get worse and worse. And I tried things like antidepressants, and I continued to use my tools, but there are times when the anxiety just feels like it surpasses any of the tools that are accessible. And this kind of fear around speaking in public has been something that has been very pervasive. And I'm much more okay when I speak one on one, or if I do something that's kind of recorded. For me, that's very comfortable. But when it comes to doing something live and in front of groups of people, it's terrifying. um, and as my physical health began to deteriorate, these sensations in my body became even more unpredictable. So things like facial flushing and shakiness in the body, and um, an inability to really regulate the nervous system, which was something I used to be able to do. Even though the anxiety level was very high, I still had the capacity to regulate my nervous system. And then after getting really sick about 10 years ago, those tools just, I mean, they kept me going. I think they kept me alive, but it still was like, why can't I just feel okay? Why can't I feel at peace and calm when I'm speaking and sharing messages that I feel are important to share. And this therapist that I've recently started working with said, well, maybe what you should do is just open up about this and share it with people because you know you're not alone. And I know that I'm not. And this is one of the reasons that I wrote my book, Beyond the Battlefield. I'm much more comfortable with pen to paper. I'm much more comfortable with silent expression. Like I'm not using my voice. It's more like I'm putting words out there. And yes, my emotions are out there and my story is out there. But there's something about when you share your voice that it can be a little bit terrifying. And for whatever reason, I don't know. I'm sure there are multiple reasons in my experience. And for others who are experiencing similar things, they probably have their reasons too. So, how do we work with this? Because for me, sharing important messages is what life is all about. We learn, we live and learn, and then we try to share it with others. We try to help others feel like they're not alone and share the tools that have been helpful for us with other people. And I've really been trying to do that, and yet I hit this wall. Every time I want to share in public, for me, it's just like, no, my body's not even going to tolerate that. And in the past, that's kind of what has happened. It does become reactive. Sometimes, I've taught some very small mindfulness groups and I lead a small meditation group, but there are times when this body that I'm living in just presents whatever it's going to present. And whether it's related to anxiety or not, it just kind of happens. So, like I said, the facial flushing, if you've ever had that, it is so uncomfortable. It feels like your head is in an oven and you look like a tomato. And you sometimes maybe it's visible to other people and sometimes it's not, but it's just kind of a terrifying feeling to experience, and it's very vulnerable. For me, being able to perform in front of 10,000 people and get perfect tens and get straight A's and all these accomplishments, to me it's like, how on earth can I then show this vulnerability in front of other people? But I think this is the only way to move forward, is to move through. And maybe I'm partly doing or primarily sharing this because I want to heal. And I also want other people to feel like it's okay to show up authentically as you are with all of your imperfections, all of your vulnerabilities, because we all have it. Some of us maybe not as extreme, or some of us maybe are able to cover it a little bit better than others. But what I've learned in my own experience, and again, this is just my life and how it has evolved, I was able to cope for a very long time. I was able to kind of hide the anxiety and present as I've got it all together and I'm super confident, until I just couldn't anymore. It reminds me of the book by Gabor Mate, that when the body says no, because eventually the body pushes back and says, you are going to listen to me. You are going to take care of me. I'm going to show these vulnerabilities because they need attention. And that's kind of what has happened for me and in my own journey. So, what do we do with all of this? For me, like I said, sometimes doing this is part of the healing process. You just share it with people. You let them know, like, sometimes I'm like scared shitless, to, to put it bluntly. Sometimes I feel so vulnerable, I want to curl up in a ball in the corner and never come out. And, and yet, for me, it's very important to share important tools, to share paths that can lead to healing. And eventually, I want to be able to share my book with as many people as possible. I think this uh, social phobia has really become apparent to me of late when people have said, oh, maybe you can share your book with a group of people. And I'm like, no way, I'm not getting in front of people and speaking about this because I know I'm going to turn bright red and I'm going to get shaky. And so, but maybe that's okay. Maybe it is. And I'm hoping that I can get to the point where even if those things do happen, that the message that is being portrayed trumps the, any distraction that might be coming from what's happening in my body. So, as Ram Dass says, I at the age of 70, I have all the same insecurities and vulnerabilities that I did when I was 20. The only difference is that I'm bigger than them now. So we develop some capacity within ourselves to hold these vulnerabilities with some compassion and some self love. And I think this, is, for me, is where mindfulness has come into play. I don't know if these things are ever going to go away for me. I think there's a genetic component, there's a physiologic component, there's an emotional piece. But with mindfulness, I've been able to get a little bit curious about it. Sometimes it's easier than others. I've been able to be present with it sometimes, and I've even been able to give voice to it when it's happened in my small groups. I've talked about it a little bit, and just giving voice to it, I think, can help tame it, name it to tame it. And so mindfulness is this foundational tool that can help us hold space for things like anxiety. And whether it's anxiety in the body, anxiety in the mind, sometimes anxiety in the mind manifests as repetitive thoughts, whether it's intrusive thoughts like obsessive compulsive disorder, whether it's kind of a generalized anxiety where you're always catastrophizing or thinking of the worst case scenario, worrying, worrying, worrying. We can use mindfulness to be the observer of the mind, be the observer of the thoughts, and see them as thoughts and nothing more than that, that they aren't the truth of who we are. They're not even the truth of the moment. They're oftentimes patterns, they're oftentimes programs that our minds have adopted. So, in that way, we can use mindfulness of thoughts. When it comes to anxiety in the body, we can use mindfulness of the body. Can I get curious about this? What does this actually feel like in my body? For me, when my face turns red, it's more the right side. It comes into my neck, my throat. It's hot, it's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant. So I can kind of give voice to those sensations. Wow, this is kind of interesting. It's terrifying. I want it to go away. And I can hold enough space for that whole experience in my body. So we can use mindfulness of the body. And then from the foundation of mindfulness, where we actually make contact with the raw experience, whether that's thoughts or sensations, we can then open to loving kindness and compassion. Can I hold this with some compassion? Can I offer myself some well wishes, even if that's just, may I feel safe in this moment? Or may I have the capacity to hold this experience? So, when I teach my mindfulness classes, I oftentimes teach mindfulness as this foundational tool because without mindfulness, we don't know what's going on. We have to have the awareness. We actually have to make contact with that discomfort. We actually have to become aware of the thought patterns. So awareness, again, makes us a little bit bigger than the experience itself. And then from there, we cultivate. Can we cultivate some self love? Can we cultivate some compassion? And ultimately, can we be vulnerable with other people? We don't live in isolation, so we have to open up and be fully human with each other. And that's part of the healing. We don't learn these patterns, we don't become traumatized in isolation. Those things typically happen in relationship to something else or somebody else. So the path to healing is also, it has to have relationship to others. So this is my message today. It's a little bit more of a vulnerable message, but I feel like if you are dealing with anxiety in any way, shape, or form, it's just important to know that you're not alone in this and it's possible to heal. There are a lot of different pathways, a lot of different tools that we can access to to ultimately know that we aren't our anxiety. We can be that loving space of awareness or the compassion that can work with and hold space for the discomforts that come with anxiety. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and thank you for listening, and feel free to reach out if you relate to this. Feel free to share it with others if you feel that they would benefit. Have a great day.